video, we left off with the James Beard and Black River. And in this photo here, it looks like the James Beard coming down, and it looks like the little gray stormer right to the left of it. Looking along the shoreline, we see some interesting signage. We see a advertisement for a circus that's coming, or possibly came already. And this says sells float, sells flot, sells floato. I didn't know what it was, so I did some research on it, thinking that this was maybe a fly-by-night circus. And come to find out, that was a pretty big deal. Second largest show in the world it was, and second only to Barnum and Bailey. So when that came to town, it must have been a pretty decent circus. And these would have been some of the posters you would have seen around in the different stores in Port Huron. The Sal's Splato Circus is worthy of its own video in itself. There's just a lot to the story. But we're talking about fairies today, so we'll try to make this short, as short as I can anyway. The Sal's brothers started the circus, but later sold out to a Denver businessman by the name of Harry Tammon, who was a born showman. He owned the Denver Post and a lot of other things, other circuses too. He had his own Flotto dog and pony show, and apparently he was enamored of the name of one of his writers, Otto Flotto, and commandeered that name to add a bit of dash to his title for his show. This photograph shows a calliope from one of his circuses, but this one right here is the Sal's Flotto calliope. This was a steam calliope and just had a wonderful sound. They used to have it in the parades advertising the circus in whatever city they were in. And they went through Port Huron as well, and I'll show you a couple of pictures later. The sound was very distinct, and you can listen to it now, what it sounds like. First thing you heard when a calliope started up was the steam engine. You can hear it here. If you can't get excited with music like that, you better have your pulse checked and make sure you have one. Part of the excitement of seeing a circus come to town was watching the train come in, and then watching all the animals unloaded and the people working. It was a real rush. I remember one time they came in only a few blocks from where I lived, where Star Oil was, where all the oil tanks were. I guess right now they have the Edison condos there. And sometimes they would come in off of Lapeer past 24th Street on that track. And after they got set up, one of the first things they would do is drive through town with all their menagerie and animals and performers and the calliope playing the music, and usually came in at the tail end. But it was exciting, and we've got a couple of postcards here that shows the circus in town in Port Huron. First one here is on Water Street. First thing you notice is the crowd watching the parade come through town. And here you can see the people waiting on the side of Water Street, going down here to the front of the post office where the fountain is. And then you notice that the circus wagons are on the opposite side of the street. I guess they could come down either side of the street as long as they left the streetcar tracks clear for the streetcars, because they still operated during the parade. This one was taken on Military Street on the west side of it. Here you can see the circus wagons coming through. Here you see the Opera House. And the streetcars were still running, like I said. And a little fellow there waiting on the bicycle to get across. One last thing before we leave the circus is that it had two star performers with it. The first one was Tom Mix, which was the premier cowboy movie star at the time. And the second one was Buffalo Bill. Buffalo Bill was in the circus, but not because he wanted to be. He had his own Wild West show, which was in serious trouble financially, and so he got a loan from Harry Tamman, who was the owner of Sal's, not realizing the loan would be used to force him to appear in Tamman's Sal's Blotto Circus. Cody fell behind in payments of the loan, and when the Wild West stopped in Denver to do a show that July, Tamman had the show seized. The Wild West was sold off at auction at Denver's Overland Park, and Cody was forced to join the Sal's Blotto Circus. Eventually he got out of that contract and was never able to rebuild his Wild West show. I think it's interesting to look at old pictures and see the signs advertising the different entertainment venues that were coming to Port Huron. And that's why I took the time for this, to give you kind of a flavor and taste for the type of entertainment that folks in Port Huron could enjoy. So the next time you see this photograph and you see this sign advertising the circus coming, you'll know a little bit more about it. As you can see in this photograph here, the Gray Stormer, which is docked on the left, is the smallest of the three ferries we've been looking at. And the Port Huron residents have given this ferry the nickname of Gracie Dormouse. And in this postcard, you can get another comparison of the three. The Gray Stormer had a claim to fame. It would be this photograph here. Because it's a high-definition photograph, there's a lot to see, especially if you're looking downtown or down Huron Avenue. But it also gives us a real good look at the Gray Stormer. So let's take a zoom in here and take a look at this little ferry. You can see the construction of that ferry by the bow here inside. And here you see the cabins where the passengers could sit inside. And that's the second deck. All the chairs are piled together, so chances are it's just starting up in the morning, getting ready for its run. The boilers are going because you can see the steam coming out of the smokestack. And here we have 6 pails on each side of the ship, and I wonder if that could be used for the fire bucket brigade. One lifeboat. Don't seem like very much for a full boatload of people. You can tell this photograph was taken in the morning because all the awnings are down on the west side of Huron Avenue. Keep the eastern sun out of their showroom windows. And here we have a postcard that's been colored in to make it a little bit more realistic. This is one of my favorite postcards, I think. There was a Canadian ferry by the name of Hiawatha that ran with the Gray Stormer and James Beard ferries. Here you see it leaving the Sarnia dock. Note the schooner there, right in front of it. I always thought the Sarnia ferry dock was unique. When you got off the ferry, you had to walk up this hill. And that hill just sticks in my mind. I remember that as a boy going up and down the hill. And of course, at my age, the pictures do help to refresh my memory. Here we see the Hiawatha dock at the ferry dock, and this is when it was closer to the train bridge. And of course, right behind there, notice that there's a freighter dock too, the Canasteel. So there were freighters in the river at one time, and of course this is the James Beard that's passing her. Here's another postcard, but instead of the Gray Stormer being docked there, here we have the Hiawatha being docked there. Here the Hiawatha is heading back to Sarnia, and on the stern of the ferry you can see these two ladies look like they're talking. In this colored postcard, it looks like the same two ladies, so probably the same shot. A little bit more expanded view here though. I like this postcard too. The artist did a good job of coloring the eastern sky. Looks like early morning. There was a couple other ferries too that was running back and forth. You wonder why. Well, how come so many ferries? But not all the ferries went to Sarnia and Port Huron. Some of the ferries went up along the riverfront, going along to St. Clair and Marine City and Elginak, and then over to Stag Island. It made for a nice Sunday afternoon trip, and it was a good way to visit relatives. My grandmother would go up on the ferry and go down to Marine City to visit her relatives, and then come back on a later ferry. These last two pictures you've been looking at is the ferry docked at Stag Island. Here we see the captain of the Hiawatha posing for a picture. Here we see the Hiawatha sinking in shallow water. She was refloated and went back into service again, at least until 1887, when she caught on fire and was destroyed. And according to the article here in the New York Times, it says in Port Huron, Michigan, August 4th, this morning at about 1 o'clock, fire was discovered on the Port Huron Sarnia Ferries Company steamer Hiawatha, lying in the Black River and close to some of the most valuable property in the city. The Harder Mill was also damaged to the extent of $3,000, on which there was no insurance. The loss on the steamer is $4,000, fully insured. The engineer and firemen of the Hiawatha escaped in their night clothes. Most Port Huron Sarnia ferries had unfortunate ends, either through fire, collision, sinking, or explosion, which is the case of the Omar Conger, which we'll look at in next week's video. And we'll also look at some of the early automobile ferries that ran between Port Huron and Sarnia.